I will be going into a grounding exercise with you today. This one is near and dear to my heart, and it's one that I do pretty much almost every day, actually. It helps me get centered, it helps me get prepared for my day and the work that I do. And I think it would be helpful for all of you in any kinds of moments where you have something to do that you're feeling scattered, or you're feeling like, oh my gosh, like all these things, what's going on for me, and being able to ground back into that moment, into the present moment particularly. Now, this grounding exercise was taught to me by my Reiki practitioner and hopefully soon to be teacher. And yeah, it's very simple. I'll get all of you to take a moment, take a breath, and also close your eyes. And once you're in this position, I'll get you to take 2 fingers from one hand and place it just right in between your eyebrows. That's going to be on your third eye. And then also just underneath your belly button with the other hand. 2 fingers there. Just placing them gently, no pressure needed. So the reason we're touching these points is because they connect to the front and back meridian of your body. This is going to be a very important energy center. And while we're in this position, your eyes are closed, you are going into a state of relaxation. And I want you to imagine, wherever you're sitting or standing, please imagine these roots coming through your sit bones, or if you're standing, your feet. And we are going to grow these roots as we go. We're going to grow them, and they're going to penetrate the earth. So we're going through the most immediate foundation that you're sitting on or standing on. We're going to go through the foundation that house or building is sitting on. We're going to deepen ourselves as we go down through that foundation and ultimately make our way to the earth's core. These roots are connecting in there. You're connecting into the source of energy that we use often. As you're connecting in here, I want you to allow this energy to soak up the energy from the core and circulate that energy through your entire body, making sure you do a full circle, a full circuit of this energy through you, taking into account all parts of your body, flowing up the front half and down the back half, knowing that this energy is going to allow you to be present within your body, allow your mind to come to a place of ease and comfort, and also just the fact that we are connecting in with nature itself. Now I'll get you to sit in this position just for another minute or two. And I love to imagine a neon pink circuit going through my body. So going over the top of my head, down to my shoulders, into my neck, and then down my back, down my thighs, down all the way down to the bottoms of my feet, over to the front of my feet, all the way to the front of my shins, going up my thighs, onto my hips, onto my stomach, over my chest, over my neck, and onto my face, and then touching the crown of your head. Enjoying that connection to the earth. And then when it's comfortable for you, breaking the cycle by removing your hands from your face and from your belly button. How's everyone feeling? So this grounding exercise can really be done anywhere if you're comfortable. Like I said, this is something that I like to do first thing in the morning to get myself set and ready for the day. Another great grounding exercise, which I will not demonstrate, but I'll just kind of let you know, it is going into child's pose. So if you're familiar with yoga, that's really the pose where your head is flat on the floor, your legs are tucked underneath you, and you are really in tune with what's going on, grounding yourself by that third eye space. And it is so expansive and so beautiful to sit in that posture when there's chaos going on. Just giving yourself that moment.
To break it down, I want to first discuss sex as it is intertwined with a more definitive word that describes our body parts. And that word is anatomy. I think anatomy is a great word in the sex ed conversation because it clarifies exactly what it is we're talking about. The word sex is so much more gray. The English language is one of the most difficult to learn for the fact that certain words can represent many different things, and sex is one of them. In the queer vernacular, as of late, a lot of people are pushing to separate the word sex from gender and anatomy. And I'm one of those people because I don't see the value in confusing people. I'd rather be very clear in the interest of us being able to build bridges of understanding amongst one another. And I know that clear vocabulary is needed in order for us to communicate effectively. Because in this world, language is a necessary tool. We run into problems when we don't have the language needed for us to adequately understand our complexities as human beings, as sexual beings. When our biology is referred to on our driver's licenses, we see the word sex before either an M or an F, or sometimes an X, depending on what state you're in. And I find that to be so very confusing because, as we know, sex can mean a myriad of different things. So to talk about anatomy, I'm going to guide you through a very elementary understanding of what is known in the sex ed discussion as our reproductive anatomy. Though what you'll find is that not every bit of this anatomy exists solely for the purpose of reproduction, contrary to what a more archaic and limited understanding of human existence will tell you about our bodies. For this to really make sense, I would like for us to understand this bit of the discussion surrounding our body parts as sexual anatomy. In my 5th, 6th, and 7th grade level sex ed classes, we do this without incorporating gender, which I'm sure is very unique to most of your sex ed experiences. I want to say duality between two definitive forms of biology is undeniable because of how babies are conceived and what our bodies produce and release in order to make that happen. But we can actually throw gender to the wayside here because it's totally irrelevant to this basic biology. And there are also exceptions to this rule of duality that we will also be talking about. So I want to bring up my sex ed diagrams. Like, I'm giving y'all a full-on intro sex ed course. Don't get scared. So it's so amazing when you think about how our bodies behave naturally. Sperm is, sperm-producing bodies naturally generate sperm cells in the testicles to be stored in the epididymis, which are inside the testicles. These sperm cells need to be preserved at a certain temperature in order for them to thrive. So the scrotum will either shrink to bring the testicles up closer to the body if they get too cold, or expand to release them further away from the body if they get too hot. The magical phenomenon we know as the period is a means of an egg-producing body performing a self-cleaning process all on its own. A body with a uterus is born with all of the eggs it could ever release stored in the ovaries. That's around 1 million eggs, about the size of a grain of sand. And they get released once a month naturally from the ovaries out through the fallopian tubes into the uterus, where they disintegrate, and then the body cleans itself to start the process all over again. This naturally rids the body of bacteria. Again, reproduction isn't the only purpose for this anatomy, and it's amazing what the body does all on its own to take care of itself. the high protein fluid we know as semen is created inside of a sperm producing body only when enough blood runs through the penis, making it hard. As we know, this is often connected to raw emotional impulses, sensitive nerve endings in the penis reacting to touch, or sometimes brain waves that signal the body into a relaxed state, allowing blood flow to move into newly open spaces. At this point, the body is literally adjusting itself into sex mode. Thus, an erection occurs. We actually have very little control over this when it happens, which really speaks, I think, to the mystique of our sexual selves. Clitoral erections. Clitoral erections happen the exact same way in an egg-releasing body. The same stimulants that can cause a penis to go erect cause the clitoris to go erect. The only difference is that the sexual anatomy of a person with a uterus is all on the inside. So we can't see it nearly as plainly with the naked eye when the clitoris goes erect. We can, however, see that the clitoral hood will pull back, exposing the external butt of it, otherwise known as the glans. At the time of a clitoral erection, we may also see that the vaginal lips, both the labia minora and majora, become a bit swollen. The vagina also secretes a natural lubricant all on its own, which is pretty magical. The sole purpose of the clitoris, I want to make this very clear, the sole purpose of the clitoris is to make a person feel good, which is just incredible and not nearly talked about enough. It's so funny to me that people can't fathom that our bodies could be equipped with sexual anatomy that exists simply to soothe us and to make us feel amazing. And I see this as a means of the body wanting to take care of itself. Everything on your body that makes you feel good was meant to make you feel good. The shame that a lot of us carry around surrounding our sexual anatomy is a direct result of our oppressive societal limits on how we are taught to behave. Also to that point, the fact is, a lot of our body parts have multiple different purposes. The tongue is for both speaking and tasting. The urethra of a penis is for both urinating and ejaculating, and so on. And because of this, we can say that the penis was also meant to make us feel good. The prostate gland not only provides protein for the sperm and fluid compound that is semen, it's also meant to make us feel good. The nerve endings that naturally exist around the prostate gland can only be activated when something enters the body anally to trigger a sensation that is oftentimes a direct pathway to orgasm. Anal, oral, vaginal, whatever. I really want to implore everyone here not to listen whenever somebody tries to tell you something that the body does naturally is unnatural. An orgasm is such a beautifully natural bodily function that can take you to a higher plane of existence for a moment in time. And the pathways to orgasm are ever vast, and the intricacies to our magical bodies are too. So do not be fooled.
Again, I have 4 children. My 2 youngest are Korean, African American, and Mexican. I've heard so many things. Again, mixed babies are the prettiest babies. I've heard things like, oh, but they don't, oh, lucky them, they don't look too black. Or, oh, look at them, they, within the Asian community, which is something I've learned, very focused on eye shape and lids. And so I heard a lot about that. Oh, you're so lucky. They have a eyelid. And it took me back because I was thinking, wow, someone is really looking at my children very intently and really focusing on those kind of features that again make you pause, right? And you're just, I was like this happy, like, oh my gosh, look at my child. And then they just kind of went in. Or one of my kids is darker. And and, you know, they were very confused. Folks were very confused by him being so dark. And I was like, well, you know, it's funny how genes work, right? You know, I just wanted to say, like, how can you just make a comment like that? Do you know, what you're leaving me with when you say those things?
Every time we step out on that field, we know that we are somebody's role model. And what you want to show to the person that you're being the role model for is solely up to you, you know, and it becomes very difficult because I had a booster come up to me and talk to me, and we had consistent conversations, and it was a good time. I was thinking like, okay, this person could be my mentor. Everything's falling in line, everything I wanted to be, until we sat down and had this one conversation that made me very uncomfortable. So I had sat down, told him all my aspirations, all my goals in life. And one of the things that threw me off that he had said to me was, Trey, you're one of the good ones. And not only are you one of the good ones, how come you're so smart and the other ones can't be? And I just sat back and I just looked at him. I said, excuse me? And he said, why are you so smart, but the other ones can't be? I said, So I'm gonna act like you didn't say that, and I'm just gonna take this time just to leave. Because like that, in those specific moments, this is what is expected out of Black athletes every single time that we step on the field. Every time we're in an interview, every time we're in social media, what you say is always criticized. Everything, every little thing that you say is very critical because they're waiting to show that you are the person that they think that you are. And when you show them that you're not, it throws them completely off. For example, anytime that you see Cam Newton doing anything that any other white quarterback would do, he's firstly always the one that's scrutinized for what is going on. So when they get put into these uncomfortable situations, it's like when I come back and combat and ask you the same question, like, okay, why are you one of the good ones? It doesn't even sound like it makes sense. So why would it not make sense to you? Why would you think it would make sense to me? It doesn't. So as Black athletes, we're constantly put on this pedestal where you have to either you have to be hood enough to play, and be very wary of what I'm saying. You either have to be hood enough to play, or you have to be correct enough to play. And now what do I mean? Because this is not just one spectrum. A lot of people get that confused where it's white versus Black. It's not always that way. Because even in the locker room, if you haven't come from a upbringing that is not a great upbringing enough, then you're not hood enough. And then within the white eye, if you don't speak with a direct dialect, then you're not good enough for us either. The real question is like, what role model do you truthfully want to be? And if you give your all into being that role model every single time you step on that court, the ice rink and the field or whatever it may be, then that's the person that little kid is looking up to, because we play in front of millions of people, and that's including TV and stands. So you have to just understand on who you are and prepare for the worst, but also be hopes of the best.
The model minority myth is that you have to, be the best, whatever possible. There is no room for failure. You cannot bounce back if you fail, whatever fail means. And you just have to be better than everyone else. And you can't rock the boat. You can't speak up. You just go along with society, whatever society says is right, and you don't speak up, and you keep to yourself, don't rock the boat, all those things. That to me is what the model minority myth entails. What I love about model majority, and I think the reason why Veronica, who started it, and I can only speak for myself, I can't speak for her, started that and used that word, is because we are a majority of the population. We aren't just this like teeny tiny percentage. We are, honestly, we rule. We're just everywhere. And so that was part of the reason why she used that term. And also to just be kind of like a tongue in cheek, punch at model minority.
So I titled today's discussion, Juneteenth is a big day around here. And I'd like to, I'll share with you where I got that from a little bit later in the talk. Okay, so June 19th, 1865 is commemorated as the day the last enslaved African Americans were freed in the state of Texas in the United States. We're celebrating beyond Texas borders now. So the Emancipation celebration that comes out of June 19th, 1865 is often looking at, this is the last, or seeing it as the last day the last enslaved African Americans were freed in the United States. June 19th was for a while remembered as Emancipation Day, but Juneteenth, it became known as Juneteenth. And I think we all understand that's a mashup of June and 19th. It is considered the oldest nationally celebrated observance of the ending of chattel slavery in the United States. Although Abraham Lincoln's administration had issued the Emancipation Proclamation, which took effect on January 1st, 1863, declaring that enslaved people in Confederate states were forever free, and that Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant on April 9th, 1865. And although the 13th Amendment was actually ratified on December 6th, 1865, rebel soldiers in Texas continued the fighting well into the spring of 1865. So they actually won the last Civil War battle on Texas soil on May 13th, 1865. And that was the Battle of Palmetto Ranch near Brownsville. Some African Americans likely had heard rumors about freedom through Galveston, Texas, if they were in Galveston, Texas, if they were in other parts of Texas. But following General Kirby Smith, the commander of the Confederate Army of Trans-Mississippi, following his surrender in the face of large-scale desertions, General Gordon Granger, it is said, rode into Galveston, Texas on June 19th, 1863 to issue his Special Order Number 3, which declared enslaved African Americans in Texas free and set out guidelines that said they were equal socially, they were equal politically. They should be paid for their work. I don't know if it said socially, but politically and economically, they should be paid for their work. The news of emancipation and the celebrations, Juneteenth celebrations, spread all across Texas and beyond. In Texas, Juneteenth was initially celebrated in churches, and then it eventually moved into public spaces. In fact, there is a new book out by Annette Gordon Reed. It's called Juneteenth. It's a slim book and a really, really interesting read. And she talks about 4 men who bought land in Houston, Texas, that was specifically set aside for the celebration of Juneteenth. It became known as Emancipation Park, and Juneteenth was celebrated there is celebrated there to this day. It was the land was a segregated park for a while, that served the Black community, but this is a public space that is known, that is associated with the celebration of Juneteenth. And then one theory is that Juneteenth initially spread beyond Texas as African Americans migrated north, migrated west on the Great Migration beginning around the time of World War I. I found that there are specific themes that people engage when they're celebrating Juneteenth. So I had a few pictures, the Emancipation Proclamation, Robert E. Lee's surrender to General Sherman at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia. This is what General Gordon Granger looks like, and this is one of the books that I put on my Juneteenth syllabus, an interesting book. This is a picture of a Texas Juneteenth celebration in the year 1900 that I found in What is Juneteenth by Henry Louis Gates. And these are the themes that I have found that people outside of Texas engage around Juneteenth celebrations. So there are themes around liberation, right? And often what people say is that Juneteenth is celebrated as a precursor to July 4th. But also this focus on freedom, on liberation, on the United States getting toward fulfilling the fullness of its ideals. Togetherness is another theme that I found. Togetherness was a central theme in Annette Gordon Reed's work. And Dr. Gordon Reed discussed Juneteenth as like a family reunion. And a lot of us know how important family reunions are in the Black community. She also reflected on how with the food waste, food is another theme around Juneteenth. Say, for instance, all-night barbecues. A lot of people talk about all-night barbecues. Annette Gordon Reed talked about goat being a popular dish that people barbecued in Texas, even though her family didn't do it. But a colleague of mine, SD Nina Dillard, talks about how her family, for as long as she could remember and beyond, get together on Juneteenth in Macon, Georgia, and they barbecue a whole pig, and that takes all night. Annette Gordon Reed talks about how, in hindsight as an adult, she really found that this time together, cooking, preparing very labor-intensive or time-intensive foods is actually time spent with family. That was fleeting. A lot of the people have passed away now. Black achievement is another theme for Juneteenth. I just recently saw where a man in Chicago gives tours of famous, and notable or not so famous sites that you should know in terms of Black history. And a lot of the sites that he's showing, like chess records and things like that, are centered on Black achievement. Black creativity is another theme. And this particular theme came out in an oral history that I was able to look at. And the oral history was conducted by Jasmine C. Howard. She's a doctoral student at Michigan State College. And her discussion is with a Mr. I.D. Henderson. He gives a talk about how Juneteenth was celebrated in his community. And he talked about music and how central music was. So that's one expression of creativity. And another expression of creativity is dance that he discussed. The legacy of enslavement is also a common theme. And people use Juneteenth to talk about the legacy of and reflect on the legacy of enslavement. Annette Gordon Reed talked about one of the legacies of enslavement being racial hierarchies, the racial caste system, some people would call it. And that is a really, really important space, I think, for us to revisit at Juneteenth and talk about in terms of the legacy of chattel enslavement. And so because one of the main themes is liberation and freedom, I'd love to know in the chat what freedom means to you. What does freedom mean to you? And if you celebrate Juneteenth, what themes do you focus on, or what themes does your community or family focus on? Do they focus on liberation? Do they focus on Black achievement? Do they focus on multiculturalism, coming together? One thing Annette Gordon Reed pointed out was in her family, they didn't just eat the barbecue and have the red soda water, which she said she couldn't have soda when she was little. She just binged on soda during the Juneteenth. But she also talked about having hot tamales in her family. And she expressed that this was an interesting, very Texas way of engaging foodways on Juneteenth, because it really connected with the Native American Indian foodways that were carried through by Mexicans and Mexican Americans. And for me, I always teach in my classes that the roots of American culture come from at least 3 places: Africa, Europe, and Native America. And having that barbecue, the red velvet cake, and even hot tamales really symbolizes how Juneteenth shows It reflects the roots of American culture, the deepest roots of American culture, and can really be a time for us to come together.
Before we get started, I really want to talk about when we start talking about food sovereignty. There's a difference between food justice and food sovereignty. Food justice is just like we were talking about, giving out the lunch and the breakfast to the children. Food sovereignty means that you outright own the land where the eggs and the chicken and the milk and the vegetables are grown. So, that movement came out through a coalition of indigenous people coming together and saying that we're going to come up with our own constitution of that, how we want to own our own land, food sovereignty. And so, so I would have everybody to look up food sovereignty, what that means. And really the 6 pillars of it is to focus on food for the people, put the people first, and, focus on food for people, put people's need for food at the center, build knowledge and skills on how to grow your own food, work with nature, value the food providers, localize the food system, and have control locally, because food is sacred. Now, when you ask me about where the food comes from, I went and did a little research here in Dallas. I went to 4 local grocery stores. I went to 2 in the 75216 area where I used to live at. And I won't name the stores, but they were African, they were set in African-American communities. When I went into one of the stores, the vegetables looked so bad, I walked out. When I talked to some of the people that work in the store, they told me that their milk and egg truck come only once a week. I asked them how far did their meat come from. They told me that the meat comes from Colorado and Mexico. It's not there's no meat packing plants here. So that means that meat that comes into that grocery store has to come from Colorado or Mexico. When I was looking at the fish, it comes from Vietnam, Thailand, Guatemala. So the food comes from many different areas. There's nothing really locally produced here as far as going into those African-American and brown stores that's in that community. Now, when I went to the other one in my area, which is a predominantly upper class white community, I walked in and I talked to the guy at the meat market. He told me that their truck comes every day. The milk truck comes every day. The egg truck comes every day. Their food comes from as far as Canada. It comes from all over. Canada, New Mexico, California, and everything is implemented in. And plus they work with local farmers here in Texas. But I only saw a couple of Black farmers, and they were mentioned on an edible magazine that they have. So the majority of the food source that comes in from these stores that I talked about, they are outsourced. Now, the watermelons and tomatoes and things like that, they might come in, but the big products, that comes in from another place. And so then that goes back into empowerment. When we had the storm in February, when those trucks could not get through, you can hardly get catfish now because of the ice storm. When the ice storm, because it killed all the catfish. When the ice storm came, and this is dealing with transportation, when those trucks could not get through, the stores were bare. So that means due to transportation or weather or lack of gas, you may not get the food that you need. And so what happened in that case is that a lot of people in our community, like Feed the People, Not My Sons, Black Cross, Daughters of the Diaspora, Dallas Stop the Eviction, we did what was called a commissary is very necessary, did what was called mutual aid. We made sure that we got food to the people. Now I had COVID during that ice storm, so I couldn't get out. Those groups that I spoke about, they brought groceries to us. So because we couldn't get to the grocery store, a lot of us had COVID, I would have been really, really messed up. if it had not been for that. So we had to take control of those situations of feeding our people. So again, if the large organizations are not able to do it, we have to depend on mutual aid and community-based organizations to do it.
It's not just representation that matters. Well, there's a couple of things here. Like, quite literally, Birth of a Nation, there's no opinion about it, right? It is a propaganda tool. It was made to essentially rebirth the Southern cultural, genocidal, racist traditions that were, attempted to got rid of after the Civil War. And it's really not a surprise that film technology, or technology as a whole, has racist tendencies built within the very things themselves, right? I mean, if you look at any medium, the majority that, is the white majority throughout American history will use that medium to benefit itself, whether it's writing, whether it's camera work, whether it's film. These are methods of, to Mars's point, passing down ideology and ensuring that systems of thinking remain intact. And this is something that's very, very literal with Birth of a Nation, because after the Civil War, white plantation owners needed to ensure that they could have workers to continue tilling the fields for cheap, right? And in many cases, that's where the carceral system was born. And it's in the portrayal of the Black freedman rapist, the mulatto statesman, Silas Lynch, and the mulatto housekeeper, that literally is telling white people, beware of allowing Black people into society. They will rape you, they will hurt. I should have said content warning, right? They will harm you. And also, if you're mixed, then you're going to be ruled by these two, eugenic halves. One is an animal, right? A non-white, basically, animal, which is, they've used this term for all different racial groups, but specifically in this case, and most strongly for Black people. And then with the other half, the white half, you have ambition and you have goals and you have, you're articulate, you can talk as a statesman, and these things clash, right? And this is the danger of mixing blood, right? This is a very literal thing that is done with Birth of a Nation. And it continues. It continues in the most mundane ways throughout filmic history, through storytelling methods, through the people you see on screen, how you see them. So that's why it's not just about representation, right? It's not just about having Black, Asian, Latinx, brown people on screen, indigenous folks on screen. It's like, how are those people being portrayed? Are they being portrayed as savages, wilds, worth killing and not worth hearing? And same thing with women, right? Are they sexual objects? Are they just people that don't matter? So it's actually like, in order to really do justice to these histories, you have to actually use the medium against itself and understand that camera work itself and lighting itself and even makeup and wardrobe, all of these things have messages tied to them culturally, through history, through time, and it's all deliberate. It's all very, very deliberate. So I think it's, with these things combined, Kuleshov, psychology, and just the use of propaganda throughout American history. These are not going away just because, or just if, more Black folks, more Asian folks, what have you, any racial group, if they win more Oscars, it's like, well, what was the movie that they made? What was the message of the film? With the clip that we saw, that was the portrayal, like her role was a portrayal of a mammy, which is in itself a racist role, right? She won an award for a racist role. And by the way, she was segregated from celebrating that award. So what is the victory there? The victory is, it's breaking ice, sure, but to what extent and to what ends is really what matters. So that's a little addition that I wanted to have there.
In terms of what I know and what I've learned about, the racial, the ethnicity portion of it, right? There's only a couple. And then you go down beyond that, and at the end of the day, all of our DNA is exactly the same, right? And so then it's like we're all human. But the thing is that specifically here in the United States, but really everywhere, but it's more so a problem for Latinos here in the United States because of the way in which the census wants to, have everyone categorized. And, for good purpose, right? Like there's lots of research and there's all kinds of good reason to have a census that dials down into race, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, et cetera. So I'm certainly not saying it's a bad thing. That being said, because Latino in and of itself is a construct, right? We start to talk about the social construct of what it means to be Latino. And then who defines that construct? Who makes it, right? Latino at the end of the day can be the spectrum of races, right? There's Black Latinos, there's Afro Latinos, which I've only recently learned. And again, I speak from not having a Black identity experience, but I've learned from my Black friends, like for example, that you can be half Black, half Latino, and that's very different identity correlation to than being Afro-Latino, which generally refers to Caribbean roots. So, I think that the conversation oftentimes then turns into how can we actually talk about this without first kind of having a knee-jerk reaction, especially when white presenting Latinos don't identify as white. Because I certainly understand the trepidation and also the frustration, because we do have so much anti-Blackness within the Latino community, which is a thing, right? Like we have so much anti-Blackness, we have anti-Indigenous roots. I mean, there's a lot of, frankly, mixing that occurred within the colonization process of the indigenous people of Latin America. That coming out at the other end in terms of trying to define who you are is often such a difficult conversation to have, that when people then don't identify that they have white privilege, when they don't accept that they have white privilege, that in and of itself is a problem. That comes from anti-Blackness. So, I think that, we're not obviously going to have any answers to your question, Ariel, or even, we're almost like skimming the surface of this conversation. But I think it's just something that's so critically important to one define as far as, okay, what is race? But then also get beyond that, because I am considered white according to, the science behind it. But I in no way ever identify as white. And I certainly don't present as white, I would say most of the time. Maybe on occasion I can pass as white, and I certainly benefit from some lighter color privilege, right? And I fully accept that. But me personally speaking, never in a million years will I ever say that I am white. I'm just not. And even though I know what the scholarly papers say that I am, even though I know that and I acknowledge it, I will not check a white box ever. And I never have on the census. I always end up checking other or, Hispanic, because of course they still categorize us as Hispanic. And then, moving on from there.
So let's get into the history of dressing up for Halloween.
Yeah, that really comes from the idea of like warding off evil spirits and reconciling with death, which is why folks wore skulls and dressed up as ghosts, which is why now still we have the morbid and the frightening aspects of Halloween.
Exactly. And Halloween kind of was always seen as a day to act outside of societal norms, which I think can still be felt today. Like we're trying to dress up and do stuff that's like a little different.
So, yeah, I mean, the anonymity was historically a huge part of Halloween, folks being unrecognizable, wearing masks and disguises.
So let's hit the next slide. So this is kind of a big reason why folks found solace in Halloween who hold a queer identity, right? So we want to talk about also the influence of gay community and how cross-dressing became such a big part of Halloween culture.
So in 1907, the Pittsburgh paper reported that that girls were masquerading as tomboys on Halloween. And in 1912, women and men were actually arrested in Pittsburgh for cross-dressing.
So if you can picture, like, LGBTQIA+ community members were arrested for being caught in public wearing 3 or more items of clothing of the opposite gender.
But within 2 years, cross-dressing became so popular and prevalent that the Pittsburgh police actually declared that they would no longer stop folks from cross-dressing during the Halloween holiday.
So this opened a door for more freedom, and we see the Halloween parade of 1974, which began when Ralph Lee, who was a puppeteer, set forth his expertise that soon blossomed into the first official gay pride parade of the nation. It welcomed gays, straights, drag queens, lesbian, men, women, kids, teenagers, and people from all walks of life to support the movement.
In 5 years, the parade crowd went from 160 people to 250,000 people.
So now Halloween has gone a long way since its pagan cultures and ghost stories. And now it's kind of symbolizing a day of liberation and play for queer people of all varieties.
It's very hard to function in a modern society. And I don't know personally what it would be like to have my own reservation to be part of with my people, because we always constantly have to work with people in order to have spaces to be in together. And it always seems to be a challenge. And so unfortunately, like, something that I learned firsthand, being an organizer for my community with these like ceremonies and stuff, I never thought that you would have to get a fire permit. Like, I never thought, like, we have a fire, we all dance around a fire. I feel like it's been in so many novelties of Indigenous culture that we have fire and we respect it. And so we know fire's like electricity. If you don't know what you're doing with it, you're going to get burned. But if you know how to harness it and respect it, it can cook food, keep you warm, and we can party all night long around it. And so for us to have that, it's like natural. And for me, creating these ceremonial spaces, it's an essential. But unfortunately, here in California, they're scared of fire. There's been this wide range of fire suppression here. And so we have to fight government agencies and state policies in order for us to even have a fire that we know how to take care of for hundreds of thousands of years. And we continue even now to have a relationship with that fire ceremonially for the last, I would say, 36 years. And since it's become legal to practice our ceremonies and traditions. And so I think that those kind of things people don't talk about, and our histories that we have been kind of hidden from us a little bit because of the pain associated with them. And so as we relearn why we are in these spaces, and we have to relearn this whole way of interacting in these new spaces. And I think that that's kind of our struggle. But girl, you're doing a great job. I just want to tell you, because what you're doing is way more crazier than what I would ever want to do.
No, honestly, I wanted to say that about you too. Is like I've learned the hard way that not all Indigenous people have reservations, and that to me was very, very surprising, because I was like, wait a minute, whoa. And the thing about reservations and non-reservations is when you live on reservations, you become restricted. And living on the res, I have heard many people say, let's not be a res anymore. Maybe we can get more opportunities out here. And then there's the ones that don't have reservations that want reservations. So there's that divide. And honestly, in my opinion, keeping the reservation as a reservation would probably our not only way to survive, but one of the ways we can, because that land was traditionally given to us and we were put there. And with that, we can, practice and this and that, but also that is restricted as well. With the fire you just mentioned, same here in Canada, we can't really, there's a fire ban. And we can't have any powwow gatherings, round dance gatherings. We can't do that due to the fact that it's restricted. It can only be done during the summer. And that is, it's not really, doesn't really sit right with me. that's government laws, but we have to, I guess, go along with them.
There's a lot of ways that festivals can complement and conflict with each other, and it has to do with sometimes with the religious ideology, but I think more often it has to do with history and politics, and who's a majority and who's a minority in a population. And when faith or political stories collide, I think it's really confusing for people who come from two or more identities. So on the one hand, you can say, Christmas trees are really pagan. They come from Germany. I love Earth spirituality. It's all good, right? On the other hand, you could look and say, this is a majority culture. So Christianity is a majority culture, and I'm Muslim or I'm Jewish, and if I'm celebrating Christmas or my family's celebrating Christmas, it's a sign of assimilation into the majority culture, and I'm losing that particularism that defines where part of my family is from. Sometimes the issues are even more intense than that. So it's not as much with this time of year, but with Easter in particular. So Easter and Passover generally come around the same time. And I don't know how many people are familiar with a anti-Semitic trope that ran throughout most of medieval European history, that the Jews used the blood of a Christian boy in order to make matzah. So this completely, obviously untrue story was used to stir up pogroms, massacres that were enacted on Jewish communities by the surrounding the peasants who lived in the countryside surrounding their homes. People were stirred up to attack Jews, partly with that story and partly with the story of it being the fault of the Jews that Jesus was killed, to enact tremendous violence at Easter time on Jews. So, if you are Jewish and Christian, and it's Easter time, it's not so simple if you actually know the history, right? And it also might be that the majority culture might not know that much about the history, and it's all about bunnies and Easter eggs, and the minority culture might really preserve the stories of violence and oppression. So that makes things complicated.